Round 4 Grand Prix Sacramento, TJ Rogers with Paul Rietzel on the left. We have got Josiah Scholar up against Alexander Hayne. Now this is a name that many will recognize, currently number 23 in the world.
Yeah, Alex, one of the strongest players in the world, a Canadian whose game I really respect. I think that he won a Pro Tour before he was anybody, and then he showed the world how good he's been over the last 6 years or so on the Pro Tour.
And it's going to be a Druid of the Cow that comes down, an extremely powerful 2-mana play. Now on Josiah's side, we have got a Centaur Courser. But this Druid of the Cow is a very popular card right now.
Yeah, I think some people are saying it could be, if not the strongest common, one of the strongest commons in the set. Especially when you're on the draw, right? Josiah wants to put Alex onto the back foot. It lets you basically steal the play from your opponent and then sticks around, to do more later in the game. So in these green, blue, green, red decks, that Druid of the Cow's acceleration ability is extremely powerful.
So we see the 0-5 Surge Mare get in front of the Centaur Courser. We've also got that Dryad Green Seeker, which is another card that we saw earlier. That's going to be an interesting card to see how Alexander Hayne plays that card, I imagine.
Yeah, it's Alex has got a really kind of a nice draw here. He's got all three colors of his mana. He's been able to accelerate, and he has a repetitive advantage source on the table. So great start for Alex.
And we've got Thornhide Wolves coming down to the battlefield as well. It's the 4-5. It's the biggest thing on the battlefield right now. There is the Gear Per Guide on Josiah's side. Now, Gear Per Guide, that's an interesting card because in day one, we're in sealed right now. Tomorrow will be draft. How do you feel about the Gear Per Guide?
Yeah, Gear Per Guide is exactly the kind of card that we mentioned as being a better card for sealed deck. It doesn't fit cleanly into the draft archetypes, but late game in sealed deck, it can be really powerful.
And we see an Oaken Form come down onto the Centaur Courser, a Rabid Bite to follow it up. It deals its damage to a creature that Alexander controls. That is going to take down that Thornhide Wolves, and now there is a giant 6-6 on the battlefield. It's got its Oaken Form attached. That Centaur is ready to rumble.
Yeah, and Alex needs to find an answer to the 6-6 here. Dryad Green Seeker is actually really, really strong in these kind of situations because you need to find lands in order to be able to cast your expensive spells. And if you find lands on top of your library, then you are getting yourself closer to the spells that are an answer for your opponent's major threat. But 6-6, not trivial for Alex's deck to deal with. He doesn't have anything like, for example, Disperse or Exclusion Mage, so he's going to need to either kind of cobble together multiple blockers or deal with it in some other way.
So the Surge Mare also available as an option. It is a 0-5 when it enters the battlefield, just as it sits, but it does have that ability. You can pay 2 mana to give it +2, -2. It begins as a 0-5, could draw some cards, so it's just another opportunity for advantage. But we do see the Druid of the Cowl just get in a nice little swing in for 1, 4 mana remaining on Alexander Hayne's side of the battlefield. And Centaur Courser and Gear Per Guide untap alongside 6 mana.
I wonder if we're going to see Alex try to use a Titanic Growth here to combine with the Mare in order to take down this Centaur Courser. Nope, just wow. So he's got all those cards in his hand. He's got all colors of mana, and he's just doing nothing. So that's kind of interesting.
2 hits, and we're down to 8, and Colossal Dreadmaw comes down to the battlefield too. But Bone to Ash, that's the 4 mana counterspell. Draw a card. That is just dodging a problem.
Yeah, and a huge play for Alex. Certainly Josiah had to feel like something was going on when Alex didn't enter combat and didn't do anything to the Centaur Courser, but Josiah wanted to kind of press the advantage there and ran into Bone to Ash. So Alex is got certainly plenty ahead on cards, but still needs to deal with the problem of that 6-6 creature. And
it's going to be Anticipate here from Alexander Hayne, a card that I think very frequently is considered to be, because it's an instant, let's cast it at instant speed. Mm-hmm. We are seeing a main phase activation right now. Yeah, I mean, Alex really needs to, it seems to me, find a 6th land potentially for something like his own Colossal Dreadmaw to trade off for Josiah's 6-6 and or, kind of cobble together multiple creatures for sort of a grimy double or triple block. He's at 8 life, and he's facing down a 6-6 plus the Gear Per Guide, which we mentioned earlier, so his back is really against the wall. Yeah, and worth noting that Gear Per Guide does have an ability that means that it, could make it to where this Centaur Courser can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Currently, Druid of the Cowl, Dryad Green Seeker, and Surge Mare all have power 2 or less. Now, that can change with the Surge Mare, but that requires some mana investment, and actually does not currently have enough mana to even get it beyond that threshold. So
Right.
there's a lot of potential from this gear per guide to just break through this line.
Right. And we talk about reach for green-red decks.
Titanic Growth to give it a boost. That is going to be able to get in front of the gear per guide. That's going to be +4/+4, making it into a 4/9. Eliminating that gear per guide. Still takes in the hit for 6, though. Alexander Hayne is going to be down to 2.
Yeah, and you know what? 2 is a very precarious life total against Josiah's deck. You might be wondering, does he have access to something like Viashino Pyromancer? He has 3 of them in his deck. So Josiah untapping very quickly here.
We have got a Colossal Dreadmaw on the battlefield, and now we are just looking for really a great host of things. But any one of the 3 copies of this card just closes it out.
Yep.
It's going to be another copy of Oakenform, turning this into a 9/9 and just turning up the heat, swinging in.
Yeah, and he's going to have to just abyss himself here with the Surge Mare. Alex needs to stay alive against the 9/9 creature, but also close the game out against the possible top decks of Red Burn. So Alex is not out of it yet, but he's got a lot of problems.
I mean, the only swing in that we've seen now is this Druid of the Cowl that was able to get in really early on, which is why Josiah's at 19, but now it's 2 Colossal Dreadmaws, and they can't even turn sideways yet.
No, and in fact, he is lining up, in theory, a double block here of the Centaur Courser. Alex is aspiring to stare at the Centaur Courser here, which is not where you want to be when you're at 2 life.
And it is going to be the Volley Veteran enters the battlefield, deals some damage equal to the number of goblins that you control to a creature that they control. Just takes down the Dryad Greenseeker. Not a whole lot of action, does not swing in.
Right, and when you're in Josiah's spot here, there's no pressure in the world, right? You have your opponent at 2 life. You're not under any immediate life total or tempo pressure yourself.
Patient Rebuilding on the battlefield, foil no less.
Wow, yeah, that's big. I mean, that certainly gives Alex a way to win the game. Josiah now does want to find one of his ways to close this game out before Alex pulls too far ahead, or finds something like cancel, which could stop Josiah's burn.
And tell me a little bit, like Patient Rebuilding, this is a card that when you get it in your sealed pool, you are loving it. And why is this card so powerful?
Yeah, it's an absolute bomb.
Rapid Bite takes down the Colossal Dreadmaw.
Yeah, it's an absolute bomb for 2 reasons. First of all, it's a repetitive advantage source. It allows you to draw cards almost every upkeep. Second, it wins the game on its own by decking your opponent. So it really kind of does everything that you want, and it draws cards so quickly that it replaces itself and provides value almost immediately.
So we have got the attack in for 9. Alexander Hayne lining up just a block with the Druid of the Cowl, trying to stop it. I mean, we're down to 2 creatures, valuing this Dryad Greenseeker over the Druid of the Cowl.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, he wants to just tear through his deck right now to find some of the other really powerful cards in his deck. He needs to, like I said, first deal with the problem in the Centaur Courser, and then also pivot and kind of turn the table into being able to deal Josiah damage. He knows, even though he's got the Patient Rebuilding out, he can't afford to be patient. He needs to close the game against the red deck.
So Bristling Boar, the 4/3 that can only be blocked by 1 creature, as well as Centaur Courser, come down to the battlefield. There's the Viashino Pyromancer, and that is going to end it. Just had nothing to be able to do. Alexander Hayne was helpless to that draw.
Yeah, his deck, despite playing blue, really doesn't have access to that many main deck ways to deal with the just gigantic creature. I think that we're going to probably see him go look for something like that Totally Lost in his sideboard and put that into the main deck. Seems pretty strong against all the Oakenforms in Josiah's deck. Yeah,
and you mentioned Totally Lost being particularly strong against the Oakenforms. Tell me a little bit about that as they are sideboarding.
Yes, so the traditional weakness of something like an Aura is that you open yourself up to getting a card disadvantage situation, getting 2 for 1 by something like Totally Lost or a hard removal spell in black. If your opponent doesn't have something like that, Auras can often create a creature which is absolutely impossible to deal with in a phase of the game before you'd normally expect to find it. So, I think that the way that Josiah's deck just kind of aligns with Alex's main deck configuration, not a lot Alex could do, despite having really kind of a nice draw. It just didn't have the right cards to deal with a 9/9, as not many people often will.
Now, we know about Alexander Hayne, the Canadian pro who has won a Pro Tour, has put up a multitude of GP top 8s, 11 of them.
Wow.
I think Josiah Scholar from Oakland, actually, in-state, and has been playing since revised.
Wow.
So this is a player from the 90s, and he's actually got second at Grand Prix Portland in 2014 with a couple of teammates, Eric Severson and Ben Weitz.
Interesting. Wow, and we see here Alex is doing some major surgery on his deck. So it would appear to me that he's potentially changing his entire deck up, at least moving a color out. There are some people who, through gamesmanship, could be just taking out one type of basic land for another. Alex does not strike me as that kind of person. So we might see a situation where he is playing an entirely different deck in Game 2.
Yeah, and we saw that actually in round 2. And this is just making me wonder, is this a format where your sealed pools might lend themselves to these multiple decks that you can construct?
Yeah, it's certainly the case. I mean, as we mentioned, there are bombs, there are removal spells, and then there are aggressive type cards, right? And you need something like that. Alex's Game 1 configuration appeared to not have really any of that, right? It was kind of just like a mid-rangey teamer, curve into some 6/6s, hope that's good enough. That's traditionally not a great plan in sealed deck. And so I think that we're going to find him either go to something like, for example, he has a Lathless Dragon Queen in red, so we might see a heavier red build, or potentially go into white where he has things like Take Vengeance, which could deal with something that has Oaken Forms on it. So some different kind of color combination that goes in one more clear direction as opposed to just good stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be a really interesting way. I'm just loving the aspect that we're seeing a lot of these players who have been familiar with this game for a very long time coming back to a core set and just kind of throwing out the playbook as far as this, minor sideboarding, pick the best deck that you have, and instead really looking at their pool holistically about what's the Game 1 configuration, but how far can you go in these Game 2, Game 3 configurations? That's really interesting to me.
You can go pretty far, especially day one in a core set. It's very unlikely that your deck is going to be filled with synergy, so the equities of your different colors are going to be fairly close together. Your blue-red deck versus your blue-green deck, they could be a 6 versus a 6.5. So it's really about what matches up best against what your opponent is doing.
Yeah, and we saw that patient rebuilding from Alexander Hayne in Game 1. I'd be surprised if that wasn't still part of his game plan.
Yeah, I think it's going to be blue-red, honestly, if I had to predict. He has an Enigma Drake and 2 Tormenting Voice and a Lathless, so I think that stuff is pretty attractive into a post-Cyborg configuration. We'll obviously see what Alex elects to do, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw him play a blue-red deck.
An Enigma Drake, that's a card that we actually saw fairly recently. That was from Amonkhet, and it was pretty powerful then too, wasn't it?
Yeah, really powerful in Amonkhet. Certainly one of the cards that took you into blue-red in that format. Here, a little less powerful in Magic 2019, but still, a perfectly acceptable card that will frequently become a 2/4 or a 3/4 flyer before it's supposed to, so.
And in sealed alone, flying is...
Oh, yeah. I mean, evasion, sealed deck, we talked about it, right? I haven't found that this format really stalemates as much as maybe past core sets do, but you do get those kinds of games where both players are kind of staring at each other over a wall of good blockers, and in that case, having the evasive threat can oftentimes be the edge.
So we do have a mulligan down to 6 for Josiah, as if you had Alexander Hayne keeping that 7, and we're going to put this card to the bottom. It's going to be an island, and we are kicking off Game 2. It's time to see where exactly we landed. Mountain comes down, followed by a mountain for Alexander. Viashino Pyromancer, we saw that he has 3 copies of it. We saw it close out last game, and now it's down as just a 2/1 on turn 2. It's going to start turning sideways. We see an Anticipate to take a look at the top 3, put one of them into your hand, then draw a card, 3 mana, passing the turn.
Yeah, it does look like Alex did go to that blue-red configuration that we discussed between games. The Anticipate, he very quickly took an island, so possible situation where he needs to, wow.
My favorite card of the set, Dismissive Pyromancer, tries to come down, cancel, though eliminates it from contention, so we know of at least some Bone to Ash. We know of the cancel, so Alexander's willing to say no to some of this game plan from Josiah. I'm curious, though, this Viashino Pyromancer, it's attacking in, it's a 2/1. those are small attacks. But Alex, he's down to 14.
It's the dream situation for the Viashino Pyromancer is to be able to get in 6 damage, early in the game. Even if it does nothing else for the remainder of the game, you've already gotten pretty nice value for your 2-drop. So, and it's sitting there, and if Josiah is able to amplify his 2-1 or deal with Alex's blocker, it's threatening to deal another 2 damage, and all of a sudden it's taken half of Alex's life total. So Viashino Pyromancer, not a card that I value very highly in sealed deck because it can oftentimes get outclassed, but you do have corner cases like this where Alex gets out to kind of a slow start that it really looks like an all-star.
And we are going to see declared dominance on a Viashino Pyromancer. +3/+3. All creatures must block it if able. That's uncomfortable chill. That is going to be -2/-0 to the creature. It means that the Surge Mare was able to get in the way. Alexander Hayden was able to draw a card, and he was able to come away pretty nicely.
Yeah, Josiah taking a big risk there, casting a Declare Dominance into open mana from a blue-red deck that has done nothing, and it really works out poorly for him as Alex is able to essentially 1-for-0 him.
We know about the Patient Rebuilding, but Psychic Corrosion comes down as well.
Yeah.
The enchantment, whenever he draws a card, it's going to be 2 cards to the graveyard from the top of the library from Josiah. The Surge Mare, we are going to pay a little bit of mana just to turn it into that 2/3. That draws a card. By drawing that card, we now see 2 cards go to the graveyard. It's a forest and a mountain, and this mill game plan is back in it.
Yeah, Alex has to love the way this is developed, right? So he's able to cancel the really devastating threat, using obviously the uncomfortable chill to negate the impact of the Declare Dominance. Now he's got his engine going with the Psychic Corrosion, and his life total still at a relatively healthy 14. So Alex is in a good spot.
8 damage from the one Viashino Pyromancer.
Yeah, it's a hard-working Pyromancer, but that was a really kind of a critical turn for Josiah to be able to add another big threat to the board, and he wasn't able to, to do that.
Oh, now that's a cool card, Runic Armasaur. Not going to be doing a whole lot from the graveyard, but a 3-mana 2/5 that also starts drawing some cards as well for Josiah.
Yep.
Tormenting Voice, that's going to be discard a card, draw 2 cards. Let's get some more in there. We see the Oaken Forms, the Titanic Growths, what looks to be a fiery finish to me. This is Sarkon's Unsealing too.
Alex has all sorts of combos. He's got a full combo deck. So this is exactly what we talked about between games, right? Alex's game 1 deck was just kind of a good stuff. I got all these green cards. I'm going to ramp and do nothing. His deck now is like a pure combo deck. It's counter burn with a little mill as well.
And we haven't even seen a creature yet with that power 4, 5, or 6. We saw the Colossal Dreadmaws, but the green cards are out. I'm really curious to see what comes in for this Sarkon's Unsealing. You mentioned a Lathlis the Dragon Queen.
Mm-hmm. Lathlis the Dragon Queen. He does have, looks like, a couple of copies of Fire Elemental that he has access to in red. I don't know if those are in the deck. I would imagine they are.
We've got a Fire Elemental on Josiah's side of the battlefield as well, joining that Viashino Pyromancer. And as these... Oh, yes! Lathlis Dragon Queen comes down, eliminates the Fire Elemental, the flying 6/6. And what's more is that if there are any other dragons in this deck, they'll be making some 5/5s to come alongside them.
Yep.
And in the meantime, this has got sort of a pseudo double-costed Fire Breathing. Anytime that he's got an extra 2 mana, can just invest that into this Lathlis and get extra damage.
Yeah, and Josiah is facing on the board here multiple threats that are kind of difficult for him to deal with. And at the same time, Alex is just absolutely tearing through Josiah's library, right? So, we're looking at a library that's probably around 14, 15 cards at this point. So Josiah has to figure out, what is the biggest problem to deal with? He's in the opposite situation Alex was in last game, right? He has to deal with the board and figure out a way to get Alex dead before... Whoa!
Swinging in with the Viashino Pyromancer into a 0/5 and a 6/6?
Interesting.
So in Josiah's hand, I was able to get a look at a couple of the cards. I see a Rabid Bite, and I see an Act of Treason.
Okay.
That Act of Treason has maybe got some potential in this.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, we talked about, is only at 12 life, so...
Volley Veteran comes down. It's going to deal another damage to this Surge Mare. 2 damage marked on this 0/5. And it's going to be also a Rabid Bite to finish it off. So dealing that 3 damage to the Surge Mare, that ends up completing the 5 damage that's marked on it. That goes to the graveyard. Now it's just the Lathless.
Yeah, little surprising that Josiah valued killing the Surge Mare over the Lathless there. Lathless is a 5/5, right? Or is it 6?
It's a 6/6.
Oh, it's a 6/6.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, my gosh. So, wow.
It's going to be Siegebreaker Giant. Oh, my goodness. She's going to crash into this field, deal 4 damage to the Volley Veteran, and this is a 6/3 with Trample and a 4-mana activated ability to make target creature unable to block this turn. Earlier today, we were talking about how valuable having a place to put your mana on the battlefield, having a place to invest your mana, if you have low cards in hand, anything like that. Lathless Dragon Queen, also Siegebreaker Giant.
This happens so frequently, I find, when you play cards like Psychic Corrosion, right? Lathless, obviously being a 6/6 we saw last turn, absolutely huge. Siegebreaker Giant, Sarkhan's Unsealing. Alex is just going to get Josiah dead. So the Psychic Corrosion, it's cute, and it may be a way that he tries to win Game 3, but Alex is going to be able to probably get this thing done the hard way.
Right now, what we can say about the Psychic Corrosion is that it put those cards that might have been able to do it in the graveyard.
Right.
So 6 mana available to Josiah. We're going to lead off with a 3-mana play. It's going to be that Act of Treason on the Siegebreaker Giant. Now, there are no blocking creatures. Alexander Hayne is tapped out. No mana available. It's going to be Rabid Bite to take down Lathless. It's going to be an attack in for 8. He's going to find himself down to 4 mana. He's in a precarious position.
Yeah,
4 life.
Yeah, down to 4 life.
Oh, and I think that was the fire.
Oh, my God. He mills Banefire. Wow.
Banefire's a pretty good card.
I take it back. Psychic Corrosion. Of course, Psychic Corrosion is just a random effect. It just moves Josiah to a different part of his deck. So it could just as likely have gotten Josiah to Banefire as milling Banefire. But here, Alex has to feel pretty great that Banefire is not at risk of going into Josiah's hand.
Fire Elemental, take down the Viashino Pyromancer. And now it's just the Siegebreaker Giant, the Psychic Corrosion showing what it can do in theory, I guess.
Yeah.
I suppose it was just as likely to just mill the cards on top of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in this case it looks good, but if it's one card further down, then Alex just milled him right to it. So not really not a real effect, but it certainly feels good here.
So Josiah is down to 5. It's going to be an Oaken form on it, and now we are... With the Siegebreaker Giant out, this strikes me as sort of just a hope that Alex forgets what his cards do.
Right.
Maybe. So it's going to be turn them sideways, and that is going to be moving us into Game 3. Now, Josiah's deck looked about the same, all things considered, so not a huge amount of changes. We did see more of those Oaken forms come down, but... the presence of that Banefire in the deck, does that do anything from Alex's mindset in this matchup?
Definitely. So, from Josiah's perspective, I think we'll probably just see him tune around the edges. He's got a Naturalize in his sideboard that he may dip into for Game 3. From Alex's perspective, he now knows about multiple Viashino Pyromancers, about Banefire, about Active Treason. He's seen a good chunk of Josiah's deck from milling with the Psychic Corrosion. So in Game 3, if he gets into a situation where he has potentially a small advantage or even at board parity, he may bias towards trying to get the game over with as quickly as possible because he knows that Josiah has some draw steps that can provide him reach and deal those last points of damage, and one of them, Banefire, you can't stop. So, I think that Alex needs to obviously be able to navigate and manipulate the early game to a situation where he has an advantage, but then press that advantage as quickly as possible to prevent himself from dying.
Yeah, and another aspect that I think we saw in his deck, and I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are about how this can affect how you use it. We've seen Bone to Ash, we've seen Cancel. Now, does the way that you play those cards or when you hold up for those cards, does that get affected at all also once you get to see such a wide swath of what's in your opponent's deck? Does that change your play style?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think with Bone to Ash specifically, because it's so expensive and because it gets you immediate card advantage, you're really going to just Bone to Ash almost for sure the first thing that you're able to Bone to Ash. You can't just leave 4 mana up the entire game. Because Cancel is more flexible, you may want to save Cancel for something like active treason on your Lathless, or a huge, gigantic green creature, something along the lines of Colossal Dreadmaw, as opposed to using it on, a Centaur Courser or something like that. So it'll be interested to see how Alex kind of navigates that. And even if those cards are in his deck, we expect him to be on the draw here for Game 3. Counter Magic is a little harder to utilize when you're on the draw because you're already dealing with being behind from a tempo perspective. So, interesting situation and certainly a tough spot for Alex against what looks like a pretty good version of Green-Red from Josiah.
Yeah, and this Green-Red deck, is it an archetype that you've been pretty impressed with in the sealed format?
Yeah, I think the green is just objectively one of the strongest colors in the format. The Green-Red decks tend to look pretty good. I think that they have size, they provide tempo, they have good removal spells, both from green and from red. And if you have kind of the bombs that Josiah certainly has to give you that reach or that late game power, it's certainly one of the most powerful archetypes in the format.
Yeah, and of course we also just saw the reach pretty early on with those Viashino Pyromancers, a card that I think this gives us a good opportunity. Tell me a little bit about the 2-mana creatures of this format.
Yeah, so like any other format, right, there are some 2-mana creatures that are more vanilla, and then there are some that have value late in the game. So, for example, Oresco Swiftclaw, it's going to be really valuable for you on turn 2 if they don't have a way to deal with it. If you draw that card on turn 6 or 7, it's almost useless. When you have something like Viashino Pyromancer, obviously on turn 2, totally fine to just put it onto the battlefield, get some damage in like Josiah did. But if you draw it late in the game, it can oftentimes be that last 2 points of damage like we saw in Game 1. And so in sealed decks specifically, you really want to bias towards playing the latter type of cards that will have some utility when you draw them late in the game. You don't want to risk just drawing an underpowered, kind of a beatdown type of vanilla 2-drop. So, including the right 2-drops in your sealed deck is a key skill to success in this format.
And I think a lot of this really translates to sort of the differences between sealed and draft. They are still limited formats. It's the same cards that you have access to. By the way, Josiah on a mulligan down to 6. Once again, we did see that in Game 2 as well. It's going to be the Viashino Pyromancer. It's coming down again. But yeah, just to tie that up, a lot of what you're saying is sort of there's this very big difference in the quality of cards and what you want to do in sealed and draft.
Right. Yeah, and certainly there are plenty of archetypes in draft that are synergistic, that where the Viashino Pyromancer plays a very important role, but sealed deck a little different.
So we saw a Dark Dweller Oracle come down to the battlefield. The Viashino Pyromancer attacked on into it. A pretty simple trade. Centaur Courser comes down. Then the Enigma Drake, this is the card that we were mentioning earlier, comes down to the battlefield. Right now it's just a 0/4.
Right.
But as this it will continue to grow as Alex starts casting any of these other instants or sorceries that are in his deck.
Yeah, and Alex really a man after my own heart. I really like the way that he has navigated these first few turns. One thing that we often see people do, especially less experienced players, is just take it. I'm not going to block. I'll take it. I don't want to trade, especially, a valuable rare for your, underpowered 2/1 common 2-drop. Alex, though, understanding his role in the matchup, is just willing to trade off resources, which is especially good against a player on a mulligan.
And we've got that Psychic Corrosion coming down on turn 4, a pretty good time for it. We've also got the Fountain of Renewal. This is a pretty interesting card. Banefire takes down the Enigma Drake for 5 mana. This is a swing in for 6, but that Fountain of Renewal looks pretty simple.
Yeah, it's simple, but quite strong here. Alex, it's going to buy Alex probably a few turns by gaining him a few life over the course of the game, and then he can trade it in for a card and the ability to mill Josiah at some point. And Alex, go ahead.
And we're able to see some of the versatility of this Banefire, where we saw it actually used as a removal spell, where last time it would have been sort of a finishing card that would have closed out the last points of damage. This card, it is a sorcery, but because it's that X amount of damage to any target, very versatile.
Yeah, and Alex is under a little bit of life total pressure here from the 2 creatures, but Josiah down to just 1 card in his hand. If Alex can find one sizable creature or a pair of removal spells here, he's really in the driver's seat.
And we are going to see dwindle on the Centaur Courser. It's now just the gear per guide. there is the Fountain of Renewal to gain a little bit of life.
Yep.
And we saw that Tormenting Voice. That's going to be another 4 cards off of the Psychic Corrosion.
Huge inflection point here. Josiah needs to add to his board. So now, Alex, this is the point in the game, if you're looking at the advantage bar, if you like to watch the Pro Tour, where the advantage bar has swung, certainly in Alex's favor. He's got that fountain to continue gaining him his life, and he's got the Psychic Corrosion working on Josiah's life total. So he really just has the one threat left to deal with.
And we see 2 cards in hand, out down to 1 because a land hits the battlefield. But that last card in hand is very much not something that is being committed to the board, and there's not a whole lot at 7 mana that you wouldn't.
Right.
So that probably lends a little bit of mentality from Alex's perspective of what that last card is.
Mm-hmm. And we see here, Alex waits to sacrifice his fountain until he can leave up 4 mana, which if I'm Josiah, I've got Bone to Ash alarms ringing all over the place right now. So
we saw it in game 1,
yep.
And it was a little bit of a surprise taking down that Colossal Dreadmaw, and now it is ready for anything. But Alex is down to 6.
Yep.
Like, the advantage may be in his favor, like you say, but he does need to make something happen.
Yep. There's a lot of things that kill a 3-2, but Alex needs to find one of them.
So we're going to see another Tormenting Voice take 2 shots at finding it. And remember that there are some number of those Viashino Pyromancers in this deck. Down to 6 right now. We know that at least one of them is in the graveyard off of this Tormenting Voice.
Yep.
The Psychic Corrosion, having that happen.
And Gear Per Guide's ability is relevant here, right? I mean, Alex can't just find a small blocker for it. He needs the removal spell or a large creature.
It's going to be, at 3, needs to find an answer to this Gear Per Guide now.
Yep.
So taking a look at this hand, there are quite a few. We're counting up those cards in the graveyard. Does not look like many to me.
Yeah, I think that was 6 or 7 cards remaining in graveyard. So
6 cards remaining.
Wow.
It is going to be Fire Elemental coming down.
Wow, exactly what Alex needed. And I believe Alex has access to a copy of Cancel in his hand, so just in the nick of time he finds that Fire Elemental.
So Fire Elemental is big enough to be in the way. The Gear Per Guide won't get in the way of it. Like you mentioned, if there's counterspell protection to prevent any sort of removal spell, maybe you never know if Electrify will be in the realm of
Active Treason, possibly, yeah.
Even that. So at 3 life, there are 5 cards now. There was the draw step. So draws the card for turn down to 5 cards in hand. It's Titanic Growth.
Wow, this is interesting. So it's a pre-combat main phase Titanic Growth. I think that's like a test spell.
Is this Rabid Bite cancel to take that one down? Is there another Rabid Bite? That's going to be a handshake. Josiah Scholar who takes down Game 3, double Rabid Bite to clean up the Fire Elemental. Had not 1, but 2. So that cancel was not enough protection with 5 cards left in the library.
Yeah, crazy stuff. And important to note, there's nothing Alex could have done to get himself out of the situation. If he had just canceled the Titanic Growth, then 2 Rabid Bites would have finished off the Fire Elemental. So, nothing Alex could have done there. That's just a tough situation where you say go with a blocker, an answer to the creature on board, and a cancel, and your opponent just has 3 things. You just have to kind of tip your cap and say, yeah, you got it.
That'll do it.
Go to the next round.
My goodness. So how did you feel like that game went? We saw the change in the strategy for Alex. Looked like the right direction in a lot of ways. Despite not going the way that he wanted, it probably might be happy with just how the deck was functioning.
Yeah, I think that Alex correctly went to the right archetype. I think he just drew maybe a few too many lands. We saw him tear through his deck with Tormenting Voices and really just draw a tremendous amount of cards in his deck, and ultimately died to a 3-2. And if your sealed deck can't kill a 3-2, you're going to have problems all day.
Well, what is your card of the match?
Well, it's got to be Gear Per Guide, right? We talked about it earlier. We mentioned that it's a card that you really prefer to have in sealed deck as opposed to in draft. It's not that far below rate on a base level, and then obviously the activated ability to make creatures unblockable. We saw how relevant it was in Game 1. We saw it in Game 3 deal the last points of damage. So Gear Per Guide, a functional, or not a functional, it's an exact reprint, and certainly the kind of card that you would like to have in your sealed deck.
All right, well, we are going to have more Magic for you, but first we're going to have to go to these messages. Welcome back to round 4 here at GP Sacramento, and we are going to be continuing with the Pro Show. And we've got a pretty excellent table 2 lining up here. It is going to be Tiago Saporito up against Ivan Espinoza, and these decks are looking pretty nice. You were just taking a look at them.
Yeah, Tiago and Ivan both have white-based aggro decks. Tiago black-white with a small life gain sub-theme. 2 copies of Vampire Sovereign, one of the stronger cards for a black-white deck. And then Ivan kind of has the kind of ideal Boros deck.
Resplendent Angel turn 3 off of 3 planes. It doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, Resplendent Angel is kind of pure living, and Tiago using the cleanup step here. So I've been feeling pretty good about the way this is going.
So just to give a little bit of the breakdown of what this Resplendent Angel is doing, it's actually attacking with +2/+0 and first strike because this Cavalry Drillmaster, but it is a flying 3/3 that at the beginning of each end step, not just your own, if you gained 5 or more life this turn, you make a 4/4 White Angel creature token with flying and vigilance. Not only that, but for 6 mana, white, and 3, you can give it +2/+2 and lifelink until end of turn. When it's a base level 3/3, that'll get you that 5 life in a hurry.
Yeah, and Tiago very importantly finds his 3rd land. And Ivan, kind of waiting for his first mountain of the game, first unglued mountain. So, Tiago not thrilled about having to deal with the Resplendent Angel, one of the single best mythics in the format, but certainly, in contention. And if he finds some lands and is able to find a removal for Resplendent Angel, could get himself right back in this game.
And Tiago not without his own really good card, too. This Plague Mare is a great card. It took down the Cavalry Drillmaster, which is a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -1/-1. And we're seeing a Mind Rot here in sealed. How do you feel about a card like Mind Rot when it comes to the holistic sealed format?
Yeah, Mind Rot, again, similar to Gear Guide, and it's the kind of card that is much, much better in Sealed Deck than in Draft, right? It doesn't fit any of the archetypes very cleanly in Booster Draft. It doesn't help you with any of your synergies, really, but a lot of times, Sealed Deck games just come down to card advantage, 2 for wanting people being the last person standing, and so Mind Rot is certainly the kind of card that you normally want to include.
Leonin Warcaller coming down to the battlefield as well. This is just living nicely. This is going to be a giant card that when it attacks in, you also bring in more attacking creatures. This card is just excellent. It's a 4/4 for 4 base level. Every time that it attacks, you make 2/1/1 cats with lifelink tapped and attacking.
Yeah, and Ivan, I think, also found a mountain this turn, so Tiago in a fair amount of trouble here. Unfortunately, just had to wait too long to find that basic plains.
Oh, and we're going to see Mighty Leap here on the Plague Mare, eliminating that Leonin War Leader. It's still a hit in for 5. Tiago is going to fall down to 1 life. This is a rough spot to be in.
Yeah, and the Pyromancer are going to clean things up.
So, heading into Game 2, it's going to be Tiago Saporito on the play, plays down a Swamp, followed up by a Plains, a little bit like last time, except this time. But now we're going to see 2 colors of mana pretty early on, and it's going to be a Johnny's Pridemate and a Viashino Pyromancer, a 2/2 and a 2/1. How are you feeling about these cards?
Yeah, Johnny Pridemate is actually a card in black-white specifically that is a really, really powerful uncommon.
And this is going to be part of the reason why Skymarch Bloodletter enters the battlefield. This is a 2/2 flying for 3 that when it enters, they lose a life, and more specifically, you gain a life. That of Johnny's Pridemate, anytime you gain a life, put a +1/+1 counter on it, it's now attacking as a 3/3.
Yeah, a Johnny's Pridemate is exactly the type of 2-drop that you want to include in your sealed deck. Obviously, it lets you kind of hit your curve, but it continues to grow as the game goes along and is going to be a very, very, very strong threat in the mid to late game.
And it's going to be Loxodon Linebreaker, a 3/2 for a 3 coming down to the battlefield, and now it is just going to be the Skymarch Bloodletter that can get aggressive.
Yeah, and Loxodon Linebreaker, not traditionally the type of card that you want to include in your sealed deck. The Boros deck, it's easy to understand why Ivan wants to include it. There are so many ways to buff your creatures. You kind of have to make sure that you play enough.
Skeleton Archer comes down, takes out the Viashino Pyromancer. So now we've got a 3/3 on the battlefield. 2 of them, actually. One of which can grow. And this flying 2/2 up against the Loxodon Linebreaker.
Yeah.
Which is just really, it's trying to hold the line more than anything.
Yeah, and it does a good job of trading off for a 3/3, but being on the back foot, being pressured by creatures, and trying to enter into combat is not what the Boros deck wants to do. It wants to be attacking, blowing things out of the way, and just getting in for chunks of damage.
So there's going to be the 5th mana coming down for Tiago Saporito, and it is going to be an attack all out with 5 mana available. It's a 3/3, a 3/3, a 2/2 flying. There is only a 1/3 flying, so it doesn't even really answer that Skymarch Bloodletter, and this 3/2 would end up trading with one of them.
Yeah, and so Ivan has to be thinking about things like Inspired Charge, like the Mighty Leap that he saw in Game 1. But I think at this point, you kind of just have to make at least some of the obvious blocks and just risk getting blown out.
I'm seeing a Lich's Caress in that hand as well for Tiago Saporito, so he's going to have that option. Interesting that the Ajani's Pridemate goes away, and that Lich's Caress does gain life, actually, upon casting it. So there was an opportunity to gain some life prior to attacking with that one. Chose not to do so, instead electing to go for the Pegasus Courser and the Vampire Neonate.
Yeah, Tiago, interesting decision point here. He gets to pressure Ivan's life total by attacking with both of his 3/3 creatures, and I think that he values, to a certain extent, just reducing the total volume of creatures on the board, right? Tiago knows that he doesn't have something like Inspired Charge to buff a go-wide board, but he's almost certain that Ivan has something like that. So if he can trade off resources 1 for 1, especially creatures, I think he's pretty happy to do that.
So we're going to block this Skymarch Bloodletter. All 3 of these creatures have flying because of the Pegasus Courser. It's a 1/3 with flying that when it attacks, another creature that is attacking gains flying. So that Skeleton Archer was also in the air. Followed up by a Mind Rot. Only 3 cards in hand for Ivan.
Yeah, Mind Rot looks very strong right here, right? Tiago has presented not only evasive threats, but also, with the Vampire Neonate, a repetitive source of damage that doesn't require him to enter combat. So Ivan really needs kind of multiple things to go well from this point in the game, and Mind Rot's going to reduce him to just one last resource in his hand.
So we are going to lose a couple of those cards. The Mind Rot goes away, and it's a Pegasus Courser, a Siegebreaker Giant against the world. Remember, this Vampire Neonate is available. There's 2 mana available for Tiago, so it's very likely that we'll see an activation as that.
Yeah, and remember the Lich's Caress that we still know Tiago has in his hand. One of the cards that would get Ivan out of this pretty cleanly is something like Resplendent Angel. So Tiago, being a professional, obviously, wants to hold his removal and use it judiciously on something that could prevent him from kind of closing this out and get Ivan back into the game. So, we see that he continues to have Lich's Caress. We may see him fire it off here, as this would be a lethal attack, I believe.
Yes. So we are just going to get in with everything. This is going to be a total attack for 6. We see 1 blocker, and it's just going to be the Vampire Sovereign, second main phase. This is a big card. You talked about having 2 copies of it. It's a 5 mana 3/3 with flying. Then when it enters the battlefield, they lose 3 life, and you gain 3 life. 6 points in a single cast.
Yeah, one of the strongest uncommons in the set, and for the black-white deck with the life gain synergies, it's hard to imagine a better card.
And we see that Oresco Swiftclaw that we were talking about earlier come down to the battlefield. This is a 3/1, followed up by a Sky Scanner, which is so good just standing in front of it.
And you're seeing kind of on the table here, why Oresco Swiftclaw is not traditionally the kind of card you want to include. Obviously,
Plague Mare comes
when you have
down.
Plague Mare, sure, why not?
Live the dream. Eliminate the Sky Scanner. Attack in for 3. Ivan's down to 17. The Swiftclaw looks good now.
Yeah. When your opponent has the Plague Mare, it doesn't look so hot. But here in this situation, obviously, Tiago happy to get on the board first.
And it's going to be another one of these Viashino Pyromancers now standing the way. This is a 2/1, attacking with both, and just a pretty quick block in front of that Swiftclaw.
Yeah. When you're on the draw, getting 3 damage and trading 1 for 1 with your bad 2-drop common is you're very happy with that. So Tiago loves the way this game has developed so far.
And we're going to see that Pegasus Courser come down to the battlefield. It's Sparktongue Dragon. This is a nice card. It's going to be already at its base level a nice flyer that just gets in the way. It's a 3/3 flyer for 5 mana, and as the game progresses, when you have 8 mana when it enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 mana to give it the ability to actually just lightning bolt something, 3 damage to a target upon entering.
Yeah, cards like this are really, really important in limited formats because of the modes, right? On turn 5, you need a 3/3 flyer. It can do that. Really late in the game, you're sitting there with a million lands out, nothing to do. It can have an even more outsized effect. So kind of a bread and butter sealed deck card.
And we're also seeing that Angel of the Dawn come down. That's why we saw it attack with seemingly vigilance when it enters the battlefield. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance. We saw that attack in, and now just one of these flyers trying to cross into the red zone against Tiago.
Yeah, aggressive attack here from Ivan, but I kind of like it. He's got a pretty good idea that Tiago doesn't have anything devastating in his hand, or he would have cast it last turn. So he wants to try to get this game over with before Tiago draws, some of the more powerful cards in his deck. I think that when you look traditionally at Boros decks versus black-white, the black-white deck is going to have a higher average quality of card draw in the mid-game. So Ivan wants to get this game over now.
So we see Take Vengeance eliminate that Angel of the Dawn. We also saw the Onaki Ogre come down to the battlefield. This is the 4/2 for 3 mana. Not too bad of a rate.
Yeah, it's actually a card that I like quite a bit. So as opposed to the Loxodon Line Breaker, right, you're actually getting a pretty reasonable rate with the Onaki Ogre, and it's certainly an absolutely fine card on turn 3, combos nicely with things like Pegasus Courser, and then late in the game you can trade it off for something like a Fire Elemental. So, it's never embarrassed to put the Onaki Ogre in your deck.
Do you think that's also a card that just gains a lot of value in the format like Sealed as opposed to Draft, where there's a lot less of those 2-mana creatures?
Yeah, absolutely, right? The traditional reason why you don't want to play 3-mana 2-toughness creatures is because it increases the value of your opponent's 2-mana 2/1s.
And we're attacking in Hostile Minotaur, 4-mana 3/3 with haste. Looks a lot like Canyon Minotaur, but it's just a bit faster, alongside the Onaki Ogre, alongside that Spark Tongue Dragon. Throwing him down onto the battlefield and just telling Tiago, you figure out the blocks.
Yeah, and so interestingly enough, this is actually the kind of game where Ivan wants to be the one who's reducing the total volume of creatures onto the battlefield. Tiago's 2 Pegasus Coursers threaten to deal a lot of damage to Ivan in one chunk if Tiago's able to draw something great. So Ivan's saying, you know what? The way the board looks right now, if I attack like this, at worst, I'm getting some 1-for-1 trades. I'm putting you in a tough spot. And, look, I've got a white and a red mana open and 3 cards in my hand, so you have to respect, possible tricks. So Ivan getting aggressive, has the life total advantage, and wants to press it now before something bad happens.
Yeah, and those tricks that could be potentially around. Mighty Leap is one, also Sure Strike, another option that exists in the red section of the colors.
Right. And this is one of those pure combat steps you see in Limited. That is the reason why people like me love it so much. Tiago's got to consider what are the best blocks against the full range of possibilities that my opponent has. And Ivan, of course, needs to think about, wow, my opponent has all this mana open, and use clues from the way people have been playing the game to try to figure out what it is that they might have in their hand.
So we see the Plague Mare get in front of the Onaki Ogre. That Plague Mare is a 2/2. It already got its kill earlier in the game. And we see Doomed Dissenter get in front of that Hostile Minotaur. That's a 1/1 that when it dies, you get a 2/2 zombie. That die that you see on the battlefield is actually that 2/2. It's probably going to be replaced pretty shortly here.
Yeah. And Tiago, unfortunately, I think drawing a few too many lands for his liking. But he does have something.
And actually, let's mention that a little bit, just the difference in what we see. Earlier, we saw Alexander Hayne with an enormous amount of cards that allow him to do something with his mana when he's drawn all those lands. Now, we're seeing Tiago Saporito, plays the Vampire Sovereign, but as far as things on board, places to invest that mana,
right,
it's a pretty difficult situation.
Right, he's got 17 lands in his deck, and really 3 cards that allow him to get out of flood situations. Mentor of the Meek can provide him additional cards. The Vampire Neonate at least is a way that he can put mana into something, and then he has 1 copy of Marauder's Axe, which he can use to move around and buff different creatures. But realistically, lands past, say, around land 6 are virtually worthless draws to him. That's never a great place to be in sealed deck, because a lot of your games are going to go long enough that you're going to draw lands 7, 8, and 9. You need some way to use them to win at Limited Magic.
So we're getting aggressive here, considering this Pegasus Courser, but otherwise we do see the 2/2 zombie, the 3/3 Johnny's Pride Mate, and the Pegasus Courser. This is a hit in for 6, chopping away half of what is left of Ivan's life total.
Yeah, and we see how strong the Vampire Sovereign is, right? So Ivan was on the front foot. Things were going really well. He had a great combat step, but that Vampire Sovereign's 3 points of drain has kind of balanced the life totals out pretty nicely here. So all of a sudden Tiago right back in this game.
We've got a nice little flavor win, too. We see Luminous Spawns come down onto that Vampire Sovereign. The flavor text alone on Luminous Bonds is actually about putting a vampire away.
Wow.
Yeah, got to get used to your thirst.
This is good clean living. When you're when you're flooding out, I tell you, draw 2 Vampire Sovereigns in a row. That's the way that you really should do it.
And we're just going to turn it sideways. That was another 3-point life swing. It knocks Ivan down to 3. Tiago goes up to 14, and then it's an attack in with 4 creatures. What a difficult position to be in.
Yeah. If you ever watch Tiago Saporito walk around the tournaments, the guy looks like the happiest guy in the world, and now we have a really good idea why. Just always has this big smile on his face. Draw 2 Vampire Sovereigns in a row on camera, you too could have a gigantic smile on your face. That's good stuff.
That's the secret of it all.
Yeah.
You got to appreciate that. That black-white deck just looks like a powerhouse, too. Is that one of those decks that you really like in sealed or maybe even in drafts?
Yeah, I like it. I actually prefer it in draft, right? Because in order to really take advantage of some of the life gain synergies, you need a critical mass of those types of cards. One other way to do it is have just a few of them, but have them be in the top half of your deck. And we saw the second strategy there from Tiago.
Yeah, I mean, just watching the Magic here, this one was a little bit more heads up. We saw also a lot of situations that you mentioned that I thought that were really interesting was these combat situations where there weren't a whole lot of chicks involved, but we are going to have a lot more Magic to go, so let's head on down to the field and see what else we've got available to us. It's going to be Pierson, Laughlin, and Sam Black, and this is going to be, it looked like some speed Magic to me. I was prepared for it. I got all excited.
I think that was regular speed. I think he just likes to take the first few turns quickly.
My heart was racing. I was ready to jump into it and be like Rich Hagan when he throws down for those quick matches.
Sam here, extremely on brand to have 3 colors of mana 2 turns into the game. So you can tell he's in his wheelhouse.
So we've got Aviation Pioneer, and it looks like it's going to be an Anticipate to end Pierson's turn. This is Pierson Laughlin. And otherwise, I mean, the Aviation Pioneer, pretty good card.
Really strong card. They've made Wizards has made a lot of these 3 mana creatures that produce a token over the last few years. It's kind of a common template. They've almost always been amongst the strongest commons. So
we are going to see Gargoyle Sentinel come down to the battlefield. This is actually a card that it's an artifact. That's always a big benefit, but it's a 3/3. It comes down pretty nicely, and as the game goes a bit later, you can start investing mana into it to be able to attack. What kind of strategy do you like this card in? It's not a spectacular card, but it's very, very Sam Black, very on-brand. Other than Manolith, probably the most on-brand 3-drop you could have played. So, I'd be shocked if he doesn't have multiple Manoliths in his deck as well. Yes, so in a defensive deck, when you're on the back foot, it's definitely the kind of card that you want to put in your deck, and then late in the game, obviously, you can turn into a pretty strong threat. So Poison Tip Archer comes down to the battlefield. This is a phenomenal card. It's a 2/3 with reach. Whenever another creature dies, the opponent loses a life. Wow. That's it. And when we talk about reach in sealed deck, it's hard to get much more reach than that. Switcheroo a Thopter for the Aviation Pioneer, because now the Aerial Engineer has an artifact on the battlefield. That means that it's going to remain that 4/4 flying. It's a 2/4 unless you control an artifact. It becomes a 4/4 flying. Sam Black gets a 1/2. Pierson comes away with a 4/4 in the air. Yeah, and this is a really great switcheroo back. The Aviation Pioneer for the Death Charger. Yeah, we're really seeing here the players use switcheroo the way switcheroo was intended to be used, as opposed to previously that small upgrade we saw earlier on. These are some solid switcheroos. This is how the card really shines. No one told me round 4 was supposed to be a white elephant. I didn't bring anything, Now, if he switcheroos again, we might have to... So the 4/4 now able to could just take to the skies, try and attack in, but remember, there's that Poison Tip Archer on the opposing side of the battlefield. Sam Black says that's fine, takes the damage, and is now sitting with that Gargoyle Sentinel and the Poison Tip Archer, and it is going to be the Guardian that comes down. Gearsmith Guardian 3/5 unless you control a blue creature. 5/5 for 5.
Yeah.
In a blue-green deck.
Rock solid card for sure. One thing that I really love to note here, because these guys are playing fast and furious, and I want to make sure to miss out on this. We noticed Sam playing a copy of Tranquil Expanse. He actually has 2 as well as a basic forest. He does have Manolith, of course. He wouldn't show up without it. What's his splash? You're wondering? What is it? Some mythic or some rare, maybe a gold card? Something like the blue green, the 2/3 with the triggered ability. I'm blanking on the name. No, he's splashing for 1 Dryad Green Seeker. That's his green splash.
So not Skyrider Patrol.
Not Skyrider Patrol. Excuse me. Yeah. So you see that the players like Sam Black, the professional type players, how high they value Dryad Green Seeker, and he's willing to dip into a 3rd color for just that card.
So Invoke the Divine comes down, eliminates the Gearsmith Guardian. There's an Arcane Encyclopedia on the battlefield, a place for Sam to start putting his mana and drawing cards. We have got a Skeleton Archer coming down to the battlefield, and otherwise we have got Aerial Engineer, Poison Tip Archer, both of those ones going to the graveyard, but actually swapping sides. They had already kind of traded places previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is Sam really in his element, right? He's got a high life total. He's got the board pretty well defended. He's got a repetitive card draw effect out and a handful of cards, all 3 colors of mana. This is him. He's so happy right now.
I love that you're describing this deck, by the way, going for the Dread Greenseeker. This isn't the most absurd deck that we've seen from Sam Black in the most recent 6 months.
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, Sam could find a Michelin-rated vegan restaurant around the corner from the convention center, and he wouldn't like it as much as playing this deck.
So Skyrider Patrol comes down for a second time after the Disperse, and we are going to see just a quick trade off the Sentinel for the Archer, and now it's nothing but an Encyclopedia facing down 1 book against the Skyrider Patrol, a Pioneer, Manolith, on brand.
Yeah, and Sam in good shape, but that Skyrider Patrol does threaten to really press the advantage here for Pierson. So Sam is going to want to find something here to deal with that Skyrider Patrol, and white-blue doesn't have that many ways to deal with it permanently.
Yeah, and that Skyrider Patrol, it's a base level 2/3 with flying, but there's an extra ability on this one, which is that whenever or at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay a blue and a green mana to put a +1/+1 counter on another creature you control and give it flying until end of turn. So we saw him put it onto that Thopter, and really we see a large swing come in, and Wind Reader's face down to the battlefield, able to hold up the Manolith, but now it is a massive 3/7 flyer in the way of this. Well, never mind. Lich's Caress comes down, eliminates that one. 7 mana invested, answered with 5.
Yeah, and Pierson here is really putting Sam to the test. It's going to be a half of his life total chunked out right here, and Sam is going to be continuing to need answers. I mean, he has good cards in his hand, but he's on the back foot.
So I've been really thinking about this recently. Of all the players that would play Omniscience in a sealed pool, do you think Sam Black would be willing to do that?
Honestly, I think Sam just finds the 2 colors with the highest average converted mana cost in his pool and then puts those into his deck.
So we're going to see the Angel of Faith come down to the battlefield, as well as the Remorseful Cleric. That's another rare that is a 2/1 for 2 with flying. So a couple of flyers coming down to the battlefield.
Yeah, and Sam here is a situation where he is happy to trade off 1-for-1 better quality cards for worse quality cards from Pierson, expecting that his Encyclopedia will win him the late game. He just needs to not die.
Yep, so we're going to see another activation. It's now onto the Aviation Pioneer. That's a 2/3 flyer, and we're attacking into a Herald of Faith and a Remorseful Cleric. That Cleric just has to get in front of the 3/3, and it is going to be Abnormal Endurance. Is I think the name of that card. It's going to be +2/+0, and if it would die this turn, return it to the battlefield.
Wow.
Yes, that is unfortunate. Oh man. So yeah, Abnormal Endurance, and it is it enters tapped notably.
Mm-hmm.
So when it does come back to the battlefield, it is going to be tapped.
Oh my gosh. Trick. And Sam is just 1 mana away, it looks like, from games without us. He has access to Hieromancer's Cage and the Gem of Wishes, which if he had 1 more mana out, of course 8 mana is not enough.
Oh, man. So we're going to just fire down the encyclopedia. That is not enough. The Djinn of Wishes not quite able to get in the way. All right, and it looks like that is actually going to end up being a win from Sam Black. It did not start off, but he was able to come together with another couple of wins there with that deck. I wonder if Dry Greenseeker.
Yeah, and you look at Pierson's deck, and the Skyrider Patrol is certainly one of his best tools to be able to deal with Sam's deck. But Sam has access to stuff like Bone to Ash, like Switcheroo, like Hieromancer's Cage. So maybe in games 2 and 3 he was able to keep a better lid on that Skyrider Patrol, and Sam off to a great 4-0 start.
Well, that is going to be the end of this round 4, but we have got more Magic coming your way. TJ Rogers and Paul Reitzel signing off for the moment, but there will be more Magic coming back right after this.